that was my both and I felt prompted. I went back to second grade. And I said, I'm not I can see. Special skill set, and that's just planted, so that's what almost 3 years ago. Yeah. So I've been digging into it here. That's one of the conversations. You have some so he's actually ready. That was a good start. So I wouldn't necessarily potentially not been paying him full time in advancement either. We'll see how things play out. It'll be interesting to see. Because he retires here in May. So I need to visit. That's my number one. So I mentioned that we've had 2 games. We've got 4 guys on the JV team who aren't playing right now because of 3 for injury, 1 for academic reasons. So they're basically playing for 6 guys right now. And yet the competition is still like it's terrible basketball around here in general. And it drives me crazy because I want them to be able to compete against no matter what. So there was a part of me coming into the year thinking I'd like to see them jump first oh, this right. Treated as an 8th and 10th grader, but the numbers don't dictate that, right? This is part of the process. I will mention it. What are you going to say about it? Whenever you're ready. I can win a few games by recruiting Cuba. I wanted to see your hat. Not me, yours. I'm not going to compete with Rochester. Like, really? There's the rare kid. Pastor Joel is good. Not good enough to win championships. Then we need to be recruiting soccer in Lancaster and Harrisburg, where these guys play on clubs in the off season. For international soccer. Right. Which, by the way, international for basketball now works too. Hey, how are you? She'll make you a salad. Pizza salad.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules, especially as we approach the end of this semester. I'm sure we got lots of finals to get ready for next week, but appreciate you taking time to come out and share a meal and listen to one of our alumni share with us tonight. Our guest speaker tonight is Justin Lawrence. He's from the class of 2000, and he made it easy for me. I told him if he stole my introduction, you've probably already read this, so I won't read the whole thing to you, but we're excited to have Justin with us. He's the Senior Director of Marketing and Sales for InterVarsity Press. It's a Christian trade and academic publisher based in Chicago, and many of the books that you would pick up in the bookstore downstairs or in bookstores across the country would be books that were published by InterVarsity. And so it's been exciting to watch one of our very own sort of not only be with InterVarsity, but to be climbing the ladder and be very successful in his work at InterVarsity. So we're excited to have him with us, and I'm going to turn things over to him and just ask you to welcome him if you would. So Justin.
For myself, I don't know why. I'm always out there. Hi! Wow! Look at this. I'm speaking to all of you. Welcome to the publishing industry and what I'm going to talk about a little tonight. I appreciate the welcome I've already gotten from Skip and President Mullen and others. I am a slightly atypical Houghton student that I'm from Minnesota originally, and then be from Minnesota. No, see, I thought that's how I felt when I came here too. But something about Houghton's marketing, I think they sent me a videotape in the mail, and they had like this very like gray scene and like equestrian and field hockey, and I'm like, oh, it's so collegiate. It's so East Coast. I should go there. That's going to be so cool. And stone building. So I was sucked in by marketing, and it's funny because I'm a marketing director now. But I was sucked in by the Houghton marketing, and I came here and had a lovely 4 years here. And it's very exciting to be back. So I'm going to first just sort of give a little bit of who I am, where I came from, and then we're going to talk about publishing, about Christian publishing. Well, actually, first of all, books and whether they're going to die or not. Then about Christian publishing generally, Christian publishing, and then sort of you in Christian publishing, or you in publishing. Your maybe career in publishing, or maybe you want to read a book sometime, and maybe you can find books from these publishers. And then I have 3 books, and I'm guessing that's why you're all here, because this is a very large crowd for just a random East Hall alumni thing. So, or maybe there's nothing to do in Houghton anymore, so people come to things like this, or maybe your business professors made you or something. But whatever that is, we will come up with a agreed upon thing. Maybe I'll even do a little quiz in the middle, and if somebody comes up with an answer, you'll be one of the lucky few who get a free book at the end, and then we will do that sort of thing. But as you can see, I'm sort of loose about that. So, yes, I'm also here. I would be amiss to not thank my wife, Joy Elizabeth, for being here. She is a pastor at Hinsdale Covenant Church in Chicago, where we live with our daughter, Evelyn, who's 9, and my son, Jude, who's 7, who are not home alone. In case you're wondering, they're with the grandparents, and all is well, and hopefully nothing will burn down. And although it is 17 degrees there, they have snow seats, so they'll probably be fine. So, yes, so I'm the Senior Director of Sales and Marketing for InterVarsity Press, a Christian trade and academic publisher based in Chicago. How many people have heard of InterVarsity before? Wow. Okay, what is InterVarsity? Anybody? You.
It is a Christian trade and academic publisher based in Chicago.
That is incorrect. InterVarsity, without the press, so I cut out the press and threw it away, what would InterVarsity be?
Campus ministry.
It is a campus ministry. InterVarsity as a movement, which is like call ourselves a movement, the movement. We are a movement on 650 different college campuses in the United States, almost all secular. There are some Christian colleges that are like also welcoming ID staff are there. But it's primarily a witnessing and support fellowship. So all the stuff that your student life office here would do, the chaplain's office with Professor Jordan would do, this is done hopefully in the service of students on all the 650 campuses. InterVarsity is a member movement of what's called the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, which there are member movements in 170 countries throughout the world. So when we're part of InterVarsity, we're also interfacing with UCCF in England, we're interfacing with folks in South Africa, Kenya, all sorts of places all over the world. So we're a little bit like the UN with student movements, we like to think of it. But anyway, so but IDP, where I work in Chicago, is the publishing arm of this much larger ministry. So that's a little bit about that. So I'm a Houghton history major, and I'm in business. How does that work? Anybody history majors? No? No, are you business majors? Good, okay. Did you all have to come here? You just doing this because you like, that's so great, thank you. So how did I end up as a history major? Well, so I have always done a lot of stuff. Like when I was here, I was the speaker of the Student Senate, I organized concerts, I was just doing stuff all the time. You know, I worked on the Lantern, all sorts of things. And so when I went, but I wanted to be a theologian. I was like a couple years in, I was like, oh man, I like Dr. Eckley. I like Professor Walton. I want to be a theologian like them. I want to come back and teach Christian history at Houghton. That's going to be great, because, you know, you think about that. So, and I thought, I'm going to go to Princeton. That's going to be great. I'm going to go to Ivy League. It's going to be wonderful. And go up there. But then I met my wife, and I realized that we didn't want to go to, we want to go to graduate school for theology, but we didn't want to go to the East Coast because we'd already known, that. But we went to Regent College in Vancouver. Has anyone heard of that before? Okay. Can you tell me what Regent College is? Yeah, there's no definition. What is Regent College? Which professor at Houghton went to Regent College? You get a book if you tell me which professor at Houghton went to Regent College. Okay? No. Oh man, Dr. Page. Yeah. Oh. Did you know that? Or were you guessing? Okay. So Regent College is an international graduate school of Christian studies. So a lot of times you go to seminary and it's like, oh, we're training ministers. But Regent's vision is to train folks theologically in all of life. So not just it does train ministers, but it trains doctors theologically. It trains booksellers theologically. People will come and spend a year there and sort of like out of law or something and sort of understand the Christian worldview better. It's on the campus of the University of British Columbia. So it's this very interesting international graduate school. I went there, Joy went there to do theology degrees. But while I was there, I took my first like academic theology class. Okay, this is it. I'm going to be the next J.I. Packer. About half of this semester, I'm like, nope, I'm not going to be the next J.I. Packer. I'm not going to be the next Karl Barth. It's just. I just can't do this all day. This is just not my thing. You know what? Meanwhile, a great thing happened that God did. I had a terrible job. I was we got there, and Joy was a full-time student. I was a part-time student, and so I thought, okay, I'll get a job, and I'm in Canada, and what can I do? I have a Houghton degree and very little work experience. And they said, well, I can work in this frozen foods warehouse. So I moved to the warmest place in Canada, 40, 50 degrees in the winter, and I went immediately into the deep freeze for 6 months, for 3 months, working every day, packing giant pallets of groceries and putting them in there. This is the worst job in the world. And I lost like 30 pounds, and I looked really good, but it was terrible for other reasons. And so the first week of school, we were, some people in our small group, I said, oh, you work in a bookstore. That sounds heavenly. Because here I was stuck, in the frozen foods warehouse, underground. Like I was literally underground, under a giant parking lot, like with like 3 hats on, and it was bad. So, how do I work in a bookstore? And they're like, oh yeah, just talk to Kim, it'll be fine, he'll get you a job there. I was like, okay, so went through the whole interview process and got to the end, and they said, well, Justin, we'd like to offer you a job in the bookstore. I was like, oh great, I get to get out of the frozen foods warehouse, and here are some of the benefits, and I was like, oh wow, Canada, socialized medicine, yeah, you get benefits for a part-time job, this is great. And I didn't realize till after that I didn't even know I was interviewing for a full-time job. I was interviewing for to be one of the managers of the bookstore. And they hired me at 22 and a half to be running this really great theological bookstore, which still exists in Vancouver. So that was the saving grace. It actually got me out of theology and into what I'm in now, the business of theology. So towards the end of that, so great time there, 4 years, worked in a bookstore, shipped orders all over the world. And then I realized I kind of want to keep doing this. I kind of need a gig, because I realized in Vancouver there's only one place to work in theological books, and I already worked there, and my boss was never going to leave, and he still actually works there 20 years later, so I had to figure out a different place to go. I had to grind hop a little bit. So I went and started turning over the backs of books, and we'll get to this later, but can anybody think of maybe where you would go? Grand Rapids, Michigan. Many of your books, Christian books, are from there. We'll talk a little more about that later. So Joy and I moved there with no jobs, and I managed to convince someone to hire me. And I worked there in publishing for about 10 years and got an MBA from Grand Valley. And then post that, I didn't have a job again, and we moved to Chicago. And now I've been working at IVP for 5 years. So it's sort of this is what you're going to find. Some of you are going to go out and you're going to be like, well, I did this, and you're going to do the same thing. But there's going to be a lot more circuitous routes to getting to where you're going to be. I mean, I've already had my fourth address for a long time in just 20 years. So that's sort of just who I am, where I'm coming from. And Yes. Okay. So, let's see. There we go. All right. So how many of you have ever heard, man, no one's reading books anymore, books are going away? You know, and especially you millennials, you the Gen Zers, none of you would like to read, you just are on your tablets and all that. But how many of you maybe bought a book in the past year, maybe? Well, look at that. I thought books were dead. So back when I worked at Calvin Campus Store, I worked there for 6 years as the trade buyer there. This is like about 2007 to about 14. There was this like constant drumbeat. Books are going away, books are going away, everyone's going to read on their tablets, digital books are going to take over, it's going to be great. CDs, we saw that go away, all those record stores closed, bookstores are going to close, no one's ever going to read a book again. And we're all like, oh man, we should get out of this business. When I was in my MBA, I was like, I'm going to do anything except books again. I'm getting out of this, I'm going to go do something else. All these bookstores were closing. There's this thing called Amazon that was, I remember like when I was a senior here, I bought books on Amazon, and I thought, this is amazing. This is going to change the world, and I was totally right, but it just took a while. But also, at the same time, there was lots of retirements in the industry, so all these bookstores are closing, and so there's this whole narrative where people were saying, it's getting worse, it's getting worse. In fact, you got things like this. This is from 2014, where you get these wild predictions about digital books. Just crazy, crazy things. So, ebooks set to surpass print in the U.S. So they're taking these growth curve, like this part of it, and they're extrapolating wildly up to the ceiling about where it's going to be. So right here, they're predicting that ebooks in 2018, which we passed now, would be greater than the actual share in the United States. Now, Japan, Germany, China, and all that, but somehow because of Kindle and the growth of that, they're able to extrapolate this. And we've seen that the sky has indeed not fallen on print books, and in fact, ebooks are only about 12 to 15% of the market now in 2019. So physical books have stayed around, which is good for publishers because they have all their infrastructure built into that, and it's a little bit different. So with that, in fact, this graph speaks a little bit to what we were just talking about. The percentage of book buyers who want to spend less time on digital devices by age. I'm right there in the 35 to 44 category, 27%. But you can see the older you get, the more chance it is that you want to spend less time on your digital devices. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to favor a physical book in the aggregate. Like some of you might really like your Kindles or really like this, but in the aggregate, book buyers are saying, I actually want to spend time with a physical thing because I'm tired of this thing in my pocket all the time that I'm spending all my time on. I've got enough anxiety about this. When I want to read, one of these. This seems a little bit less anxiety-ridden. Whereas those 55 to 64, 65 and over, they're in that stage of life where they're getting rid of stuff. Oh no, grandma's like giving you the heirlooms, including the books. She just wants to read her genre fiction on her tablet going forward, right? So that's sort of, I think, what we're seeing. But there was a technological assumption in that previous slide, right? So this is going to keep going where it's going to go. It's going to go like that. And that technology is supplanting and not additive. But there's a great book called Shock of the Old that talks about this a lot. It's from Oxford a couple years ago, where you can still find people using like threshing machines in India from like the 1890s. These things don't go away. They're just always additive onto that. So that's a thing that I think people often get wrong in the history of technology, that just because the technology is old doesn't mean it's going to stop being used completely. Not that there's lots of Victrolas around, but somebody does make Victrolas still in the world. And so we don't know the future of the technology, but we think we do because we read press about it. So yeah, and I think this from NPD Bookscan talks about how book sales actually are definitely not dead. We've seen 60, that's just millions of units. So a huge growth that outpacing the population growth over the last number of years in the United States. So the good news is if you like books and you want to work in publishing, you could probably still do it in 10 years. Whereas I thought, oh no, we're going to turn the lights off and we're all going to have to just like do virtual reality, video content or something. So, okay. Any questions? I have time at the end too, but okay. Great. So, Christian publishing, Tale of Five Cities. So first, we did mention one of them earlier. So this is like the, hey man, I'd like to work in publishing. What place could I possibly live and actually have a job in that? We moved to Grand Rapids, which we'll talk about first, where there's a lot of those sorts of jobs. So I'm going to give you a lot of information about a lot of publishers very quickly, and if you have questions about specific ones afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to you. So first, my first employer in Grand Rapids was the William B. Urban Publishing Company. They're a very old guard. They've been around since 1911, Dutch Reform background. They publish enormous $80 commentaries. They publish really cool children's books, which you might have seen some before. They tend to be skewed a little bit moderate to liberal, but that's, I think, just who they are. But really, really high-quality books. Next, Zondervan. Can anybody tell me what Zondervan owns? That is like their cash cow?
CBD?
Christian book? The NIV Bible, yes. So a long time ago, the Zondervan family was very smart, and they saw this new translation coming out that was going to supplant the RSV, and it was the NIV, and it was going to be changed all. In 1978, it came out, and it has become this massive, enormous success story over the past number of years, and it's basically made their bread and butter. They were sort of a smaller Grand Rapids publisher that's become huge for that. They're actually now owned by HarperCollins, and they have been since the 80s, but yeah, they're still based in Grand Rapids. Baker Publishing Group is one of the kindest, most lovely publishers. They're a family-owned company, but they actually care about their employees and are very line up a lot with what I would call open values. They publish books kind of like university presses. They have about 7 or 8 lines, including Baker Academic, Brazos Press, Revell, which was started by D.L. Moody's brother-in-law. All those things, all based in Grand Rapids. So that's one I highly recommend working for. Krieger Publications is another one, started by some of Baker's nephews. They do some import stuff from the UK and lots of sort of slightly more conservative biblical studies. And then, just because, why not? You've ever seen Our Daily Bread, little thing that your grandma had, in the back church? That's also in Grand Rapids. Our Daily Bread Ministries is based there as well. So this is just some of the. It's like Christian organization Disneyland in Grand Rapids. We were there for 10 years, and it's like I moved there partly because I thought, well, I have a Houghton education, and that's kind of like a Calvin education. And if I explain it to somebody, they're not going to be weirded out. They're going to be like, oh yeah, it's kind of like Calvin. People who run Grand Rapids are Christian college grads. This is kind of cool because it's a really well-run city. So. Anyway, so that's Grand Rapids. Next, where I currently live now, centrally located, I live halfway between O'Hare and Midway, so I can get anywhere in the world and the country pretty easily. But there's 4 major publishers, including, which I didn't put up there, Christianity Today and Christian Century. So the 2 flagship magazines sort of in the Christian world, Christian Century, which is more the left-wing one, and Christianity Today, which is more the, I wouldn't say right-wing, centrist and evangelical one, are both based in Chicago. As are these 4 publishers. IVP, of course, the best one, my publisher. But I'll talk more about IVP later. But Moody, of course, is the publishing arm of Moody Bible Institute. D.L. Moody was a famous evangelist. And can anybody name me their best product that butters their bread? You've read it. Or maybe, especially if you're older than, if you've been married, perhaps. I'll give you a clue. What book would somebody give you when you get married or you're dating? Like, you really should read this book. Power of Praying Wife? No, that's Harvest House in Oregon. It's a number. There's a number involved.
Oh, 5 love languages?
The 5 love languages, right? If you ever gone to Barnes & Noble and you're like, the 5 love languages is one of the best-selling books, how is that? Well, that's a Moody publisher's product, even though it has a different name on there. So I have a friend who's a sales director there, and that's what he does. He goes to Costco and he sells them 5 love languages. So it's a job that somebody's got to do. Crossway is formerly kind of a smallish press, but they've gotten really bigger in the last number of years because they have sort of capitalized on the young, restless, and reformed trend. Those were at Wesleyan School, but some of you might come from more reformed backgrounds, but if you've ever gotten together with the Gospel Coalition, that's sort of their thing along with the ESV Bible. Tyndale was originally sort of founded to do the Living Bible. They built an entire warehouse in the late 90s for one product. Do you know what that is? Maybe a series of end times novels. The Left Behind book. So Tyndale built an entire warehouse because every time a book came out, they had 28 truckloads of this novel going through, which is crazy. But they don't need all the space anymore, so they've taken on some distribution clients. Anyway, that's where I live in Chicago. That's our little publishers who get together there. One of the things in the 90s that happened is that lots of people decided that Colorado Springs was a pretty great town. And that it was better than California, it was better than my denomination. I grew up in the Christian Missionary Alliance, moved from Nyack all the way up to the Springs. So there's this whole sort of neo-conglomeration of presses that happened out there. David C. Cook, which moved from Alger, Illinois, which is a really, really old church curriculum publisher, but they also publish Francis Chan, which you maybe have read. Nav Press, which does The Message, which is the kind of a similar analog to IDP, and they do The Message Bible, Eugene Peterson's translation. One well-known were two independent presses that were bought by Penguin Random House a number of years ago and sort of squished together and are now based out there. And then the Folks in the Family has a publishing arm, but they moved from California. So all of these are sort of Arab East publishers out there, except maybe Nav Press. But it was like, the Springs is very Republican, Air Force-y sort of town where there's a little bit contrast to Denver or something like that. But it's a very good place for his family. Lovely, you can go hiking if you want to work publishing there. It's all the time, it's kind of nice. And then, second to last, Southern Strategy. Which is one of my titles. Put them on the bottom then, thank you. Nashville, Tennessee. I was just in Nashville last Wednesday. I go there a lot because the world's largest book distributor, one of my clients, Ingram Book Company, is there. We actually print a lot of our books on demand in Tennessee as well. So, if you like Nashville, and you could go there as well. There's 4 major presses there. Thomas Nelson, which is the other division of HarperCollins Christian Publishing. So they do the New King James Version of the Bible. For those of you for whom the King James was too strange, they just messed it around a little bit and put some updated language. But it sells a lot, as well as a lot of other trade books. Lifeway is the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is based in Nashville at One Lifeway Plaza. Their headquarters got bought by Amazon last year. And so they tore down all these buildings and then moved across town, but their address still was One Lifeway Plaza. How does that work? They just meant, when you have the city in your pocket, you can do that sort of thing. But when Amazon comes and tries to buy your building, you're just like, sure, yeah, we'll move. That's great. Would Amazon come by my house? It's great. And Abingdon Press, which is the publishing arm of the United Methodist Church, is there, as is Cokesbury, which is their catalog version. And then Worthy Publishing was a startup that just got sold to Hachette recently. That's also, there's a whole Hachette Nashville, which is one of the big 5. So, so Nashville is the other kind of major place for books in the country other than New York. So, we joke because we can do stuff in the Christian publishing world, but we're always on the back of the much, kind of like in higher ed. Houghton does stuff, but then it's really the whole world of higher education that they're sort of part of. And same thing with publishing. There's 5, the big 5 they're called. So, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Hachette. Of these, PRH, Hachette, and HarperCollins all have significant Christian divisions. And Simon & Schuster a little bit, and Macmillan not very much. I think Simon & Schuster owns Howard and does like Joyce Meyer, Joel Osteen, stuff like that. So that's sort of the basic advice is I want to go to publishing. And these are 5 cities where it would be a fine way to get into publishing because you show up and you can start to meet people and do that sorts of thing. Of those, New York is very expensive. So I wouldn't really think about starting there unless you happen to have family who have a giant apartment and you can live with them for free or something. Although people do go and make it there just fine. But so that's sort of the big fun. That's my very, very short overview of Christian publishing. Any questions after that? No. Lovely. Okay. Okay, so the Christian publishing world, I think, faces some unique challenges these days. When my boss took over my job I have now, when he started about 20 years ago, he would regularly go to the annual Christian Booksellers Association trade show, which was usually in Nashville, Orlando, or Atlanta. And he would spend 4 days meeting from dawn till dusk with Christian bookstores. There was probably 3,000 mom-and-pop shops, small businesses owned by Christians throughout the country. His Blessings, Gifts, and Marketplace. I don't know if that's the real one. Or a lot of these stores almost all started up in about the 60s or 70s, kind of out of the Jesus movement. They were sometimes run well, sometimes run to shoestring. But they serve a really, really important link in the world of Christian publishing. They could break a book if enough stores got excited about it and could really get interested in it. It could go well. One of the reasons they were enabled is that this is my theory at least, that if you've ever noticed that there's a lot of strip malls in America, and that's partly because there's a whole thing about accelerated depreciation where it's quite easy to build a strip mall and try to get tenants, and that there's a tax advantage for that. So that they were sort of enabled by this fairly cheap real estate space for that. So there's this sort of overbuilding of that, and the industry got to the point where there's, just tons of these stores. And then of course, Amazon comes in about 1999, and Christians, try for a while to buy there, but a new generation comes up, and the whole idea of waiting more than a day or two for a book, just sort of, especially with ebooks, then sort of blows people's minds, right? You laugh, but and so what we've seen is an absolute bloodbath in these organizations, which has been sort of the sadness of my time in publishing, and also of my boss, especially, who was originally a bookstore owner. At one point, oversaw a very good store association, about 60 stores. They were all sort of thoughtful Christian bookstores, where you didn't just go in and buy Jesus junk. You actually went in and bought thoughtful books that helped you lean into your Christian life well. So that is to the point now where I think we probably have 600 or 700 total stores on our list, and maybe that the sales of IDP books into those, the top maybe 15 or so in the whole country, which is just staggering, given the reality I came up with when I first started going to these conferences and knew all these bookstore owners. And the ones that have survived really know their customers well. They aren't just in it; they're in it because they know the whole of book publishing, not just whatever the reps were selling to them. So I think also that the church has definitely shifted. I think there's a good thing in this, because in some ways I want people to not just read Christian stuff. I don't want people to read a Christian cookbook. I want them to read a cookbook. Our gospel is not just for each other, it's for the whole world. So I think it's good that people are shifting away from reading only Christian books to being a multi-genre buyer. But you can imagine that if you're feeding across there, the Christian bookstore is only going to buy this much, and Christian publishers are only going to do this one thing. And I think for IBP, as we'll talk about later, our challenge is that we only sell one genre of books. We only sell non-fiction Christian books. We don't sell fiction, we don't sell Bibles, we do sell Bible studies. So if you're not into that, it's very hard for us to reach you as a buyer. One of the good things I'd say is that there's been a shift away from this, what I would call the traditional Christian marketplace, where it's purpose-driven life and some of these books that are very much Christian celebrity books, Kirk Cameron or people like that. If you love Kirk Cameron, I'm sorry, or whoever. If you love, you have a particular favorite in that, I'm sorry. But I think that the books that we're seeing now that are hits are in areas that I think actually help the church. I think multicultural publishing has been a huge thing within Christian publishing. We're to the point with IDP, we've been publishing, partly because of our commitment to multi-ethnicity within the fellowship. 50% of IDCF students are non-white, and so we've been publishing books like Being the Kingdom in Christ, African American Experience for 20 or 30 years, because the fellowship had already changed demographically. But we're to the point now where we're actually going to compete for ethnic minority books with other publishing houses, because people have woke up and said, oh wait, the church isn't white, it isn't just white. The growth in the American church is coming outside of the white community. And so that's been kind of fun to see, just the complete explosion in really interesting books from minorities, people of color. So that's a cool trend that we've been able to be part of a little bit. The next trend is spiritual formation. I think if you would have come to me or talked about maybe 25 years ago to an average Christian bookseller or Christian in the queue, they would have been like, I don't know, that seems really Catholic. These sort of fixed hour prayer or spiritual directors, all these sorts of things. That seemed very not us a while ago. But I think a lot of Christians have discovered those same riches of sort of a wider Christian tradition. And IBP has had a line called Formatio Books, which is spiritual formation ones that have done really, really well for us. And it has the same evangelical perspective, the same biblical perspective, but sort of embracing a lot of that wider tradition of spiritual formation. The other thing that's really, especially in the Reformed tradition, but I think other places as well, the stuff that's really succeeded in the publishers that have stuck around are those that actually really know their tradition well. I think there's some application for colleges in this as well, or for institutions of higher education, really knowing who you are, who your core market is, and what you actually want to do. And so we've seen this, like I went with Crossway, this sort of explosion of very, how do I say this, very firmly Reformed or firmly Adventist or firmly Catholic or firmly Lutheran books. People who like their tradition. I'm not sure what traditions you all come from. When I was here, everyone was either Baptist, Wesleyan, Christian Missionary Alliance, or Pentecostal. I don't know if that described all of you, but anyway, but people who were like really, really into Pentecostal stuff want to read just Pentecostal stuff, or people who really were Reformed want to read just that, or maybe even, actually, I would even say that there's a whole movement within Wesleyanism. If you've ever seen the New Room movement, or what's it called, Seedbed, which is a really cool like startup out in Asbury that's like Wesleyan all the way down, like all the way to class meetings and all that. So if you know what I'm talking about, that's a really cool tradition-specific one. So yeah, I think the other unique challenge is cultural pressure from parts of society that wrongly assume secularization is coming. What do I mean by that? Well, I think the 21st century has shown us that the reports of the death of the church have been greatly exaggerated. The reports that we were all going to wake up and no longer care about religion just have not happened. People still care. It's complicated, but I think the idea that somehow America was going to become a completely unchristian nation, there still, is it going to be what it was in the 50s? No, but I think the endurance of religion, even the endurance of like Islamic faith, all these sorts of things, this idea that like there's an inexorable march towards liberalism and some sort of mega point where we're all just going to do the same things, it's just not going to happen, and it hasn't. But there's still a lot of assumptions in the publishing world. They're like, oh yeah, you're still publishing Christian books? Does anybody still believe that in 2019? And we're like, yeah, like millions of people. And have you looked at the two-thirds world? It's like super Christian, which is my big challenge. Like, well, how are we going to sell books in Kenya in 20 years? That's what we're going to figure out. So that's a pressure, though, because when I show Book Expo America in New York, and they're like, oh, you're a Christian publisher, but you publish on justice stuff, and you publish books. I thought you were racist and white. Like, no, we care about gospel multi-ethnicity. Like, this is the gospel. Have you not heard the gospel? Well, no, they haven't, right? Because that's the whole point of it. So, anyway, that's some of the unique challenges that we're facing as publishers. So, okay. Any questions? Yes, good.
Yeah, well, you touched on one thing there a minute ago, and it seemed like you're kind of revisiting it. I was wondering how you learned about, just kind of mentioned it as a segue almost, that we called the Jesus movement in the 60s.
Yes.
Had this influence on publishing.
Yeah.
And, now what people are talking about, there's going to be a diminishing of interest in Christ in the overall.
Yeah.
If there was another revival,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so, and
I don't
first I
know.
want to know how you knew about the 60s.
How did I know about the 60s?
Yeah.
I could not know about the 60s because I grew up with baby boomers. So it's been beaten into my head from the time I was little that the 60s were really important. Which they really were. 68 was very important. But but I would say, and I'm a historian that's what I did the region, church historian. So I kind of get that Jesus movement stuff. My parents were ex-hippies who, were part of a charismatic fellowship when I was little. It was sort of a still overhanging from all that. So to put your question, you're saying maybe some of that will be fixed by a future revival, or could you maybe...
Well, I'm thinking so, probably, yeah.
Yeah. I do think that I have a lot of hope for... So last year, I got the weirdest opportunity I've had in a long time. I was actually with Shirley at this thing in Texas 2 years ago, and it was called, there was a CCCU Higher Education Forum, so we were there exhibiting. And while I was there, we were talking to these people from Together, and I'd never heard of it before. But what it is it's every other year, they bring 150,000 students together to do a day of prayer and evangelism at a place. They do one in DC next year, and they had one at the Texas Motor Speedway. So I went and sold books at the Texas Motor Speedway in a rainstorm with 3 colleagues trying to supply books for 150,000, well, it ended up being only 100,000 people. But so that's like this whole crazy gospel movement that's happening on campuses. It's not happening in Christian college campuses. They started like North Dakota State, of all places. And so there's stuff that's happening out there in the church that we just don't hear about.
Yeah, one more question. You named those 5 major regions in the United States. And are some of those publishing to other languages, Europe, Japan, or just like Japan have
some of those publishers would have a Spanish language group, but the Christian publishing is very national specific. So there's a whole group called Expo Elite out of Florida that does all Latin America. There's different ones in Germany, different ones in Japan. There's an IDP Japan. I can't read any of their books, but we publish our books in Japanese and Korean. So there's a global Christian publishing movement. My boss, Jeff Crosby, actually went to something called Lit World. There's a company out of Chicago, or a group out of Chicago that runs training seminars for 2/3 world publishers. They came together in Singapore and did trade best practices about how to do Christian publishing in Uganda or something. So there's stuff out like that. So okay. Other questions? Yes.
We use a IBP academic book in one of our courses, corporate finance. And the book is by Wong and Ray. It's Business for the Common Good.
Yep.
So you were talking earlier about this book did really well. What does that look like? Can you give us numbers or not? Is that
yes, I can give you. I've sold over 400,000 copies of this book in the past 4 years, but that's not the book you're talking about. So that's my one success. This has been the thing that's buttered my bread. Read Back to You, Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery. I highly recommend this. Yeah, see, look at you. Yeah, see, look at that. So that is whoa, absolute best. Now that book's we probably sold 20,000 copies of it, but it's been in print since 2005 or something. I think that's right. So that's pretty good. We're a long tail publisher. We're here for the long term. We don't have shareholders. We're going to be publishing. We've been publishing for 75 years. We're going to keep publishing. So we're willing to invest in something for the long term. In a book, that's what we like textbooks. It just sort of keeps going. People are constantly doing that. So,
what's the cutoff point then? What's the minimum?
For an academic book, I'd like to sell 1,000 a year in the first year. For a trade book, I'd like to sell 3,000 to 5,000 in the first year. And that's pretty good. I've started some of the marketing people just try for that. And we'll go in and they'll be like, we have all these great ideas. I'm like, no, you just have to sell 3,000. You don't have to. And you sell 400,000, great, but just try to do this. Otherwise, you're spending too much money on crazy stuff. So I'd be remiss to not actually tell you about my publisher. My friend once commented that you've drunk the Kool-Aid all the way, and I really have. I really love IBP, but it's a wonderful place. So, as I said before, it's the publishing arm of University Christian Fellowship. We're based in Westmont, Illinois, or if you're doing bibliography, we're in Downers Grove, because we moved in 1996, but we didn't want to mess up your bibliography, so we still have a P.O. box, and we're officially in Downers Grove. We were founded in 1947. Our first book was a Bible study on Mark by Jane Hollingsworth, who was a staffer, so we're very proud that our first book was published by a woman. We publish about 150 books a year, like I said, almost all Christian nonfiction, and about 60 of those are in the IDP academic brand, like come in Wong and Ray book, and the rest are what we call trade publishing, so what you normally find in Barnes & Noble or something like that. And I'm one of the 10 largest independent Christian presses in the country, which is a lot of qualifiers. We're definitely not one of the largest presses, 10 largest presses, and not even one of the largest owned Christian presses, but we're one of the largest independents. So yeah, this is the thing you might actually care about as I've gone on for quite a while. So what actually does a Christian publishing firm look like, or publishing firm look like? So there's sort of three major parts of the house, right? There's the editorial thing. So if you're an English major, you probably will end up there, or we have some theology majors as well. That's acquisitions, where you go out and you take an author, like, hey, you got an idea? Can we go get coffee? And you talk through all of that, and you hope that they acquire that sort of thing. We have 6 acquisitions editors, or maybe 7 now. There's development, so the editors do that as well. They're like, okay, we take your idea, we take your manuscript, and we put it through all that, and then it goes through proofreading. There's a whole, you can imagine all the steps of that as it goes through. And in our house, this isn't true everywhere else, but the actual production goes through there, which is somebody actually has to call up the printer and be like, hey, we need 3,000 copies of the business book stack, that sort of thing. We send out of the warehouse about 2 million books a year from IBP, and so you're continually having to refresh all of that. I'm in a meeting almost every week where we're sort of saying, okay, buy 10,000 more of that, buy 250 more of that, buy, now we're up to buying 80,000 copies at a time of this one, which is blowing my mind a little bit. In fact, we buy so many that we actually have them stored in Michigan at the printer because they have extra warehouse space for that. So the middle is me, sales, marketing, creative. I'm the sales and marketing director. I have a creative and consumer engagement director of Lorraine who I work with. And this is like all that push-pull demand of letting people know about the book, publicity, getting started using Publishers Weekly, Christianity Today, all of that sort of stuff. If we get on the radio, that goes through there. And then creative also is someone actually had to design this cover, front, back, all that. We have flyers, all the different things that go along with that. So that's so that could be your graphic design major. Sales is everything, and marketing tends to be business majors. I feel like we end up with those some, but it's the business majors, especially in finance, fulfillment, and operations, and IT. That's where we end up with the most of those. We do our own fulfillment. That's pretty uncommon for Christian publishers these days. A lot of them have outsourced to other companies, but we've kept it in-house, partly because we're a nonprofit and we own our warehouse, and so it wouldn't actually save us that much money because we'd actually have to pay someone else, but right now it's sort of there. And yeah, we've hired folk with majors as varied as theater, accounting, history, library science. The best, my Amazon guy just left to move to Nashville, but he was a University of South Dakota theater major. But he was fantastic at Excel spreadsheets and all the different back office stuff for that. And I'll just put this plug in. IDP and other Christian publishing houses are rated as best Christian workplaces, which is a cool, you're looking for like, hey, where should I work? What's actually a decent place to work where I can take my faith and my job and sort of work on Christian stuff? Look at the best Christian workplaces over the last 20 years or 15 years or so, and there's amazing companies out there, both companies and Christian publishing houses and all those sorts of things. And they're pretty good at retaining employees, and they don't pay a lot, I will say, but they definitely give you a lot of work-life balance and interest in life and all that. So that's that part. Okay. Questions? Yes?
Would you recommend some sort of higher education before going into publishing, or is like a bachelor's degree?
I think a bachelor's degree is great. People tend to be overeducated in publishing, and I don't mean overeducated in a bad way. Like, I have 2 master's degrees, and it's very helpful. I mean, because I did a theology degree and an MBA for where I am. But I went back and got the MBA in there. But it wouldn't have been as important. I think one of the reasons I actually went into bookselling is that I realized, like, oh, I can work in theology now and get paid as opposed to and finally have a professor job when I'm 40 and do that. I'm like, I'd like to get this whole, like, economic engine moving in my life. And I wasn't that good at theology anyway, so. Now it would be fine. But, if you did do an English degree or business, sort of a small MBA or something, that would be useful as well, I think, because knowing those things off the bat as opposed to learning them on the job are really helpful sometimes, if you can be plug and play from the first day.
My name is Andrew. I'm a business major, also a senior, and I was wondering, how would you personally go about marketing and selling a book that's on public domain?
Oh, interesting. Yes. You would, well, I guess basic marketing stuff. Get a good cover, figure out your target market, and then pay attention to that. You'd buy AdWords. You could get it on Amazon and start buying Amazon ads for that.
Is there anything specific to the publishing industry that you would need to know with the public domain?
The basic thing you'd want to do would be to get it set up and get its metadata out there. One thing I didn't mention here that's been a big change is metadata, where you have the correct title, price, where you can get it from, ISBN, all those different things, all the things that sort of describe the book on the interwebs, Yeah. And as long as that's set, that's the key thing. So if you go through Ingram, through some of the Lightning source where you can do on-demand printing, all that metadata is automatically sent out to all partners, Barnes & Noble, all those sorts of things. So if you get that set, you have a public domain thing, you can then build on top of that, because without metadata, nothing happens in publishing. So, yeah.
Great.
Cool, yeah. Yes?
My name is Corey. I'm just curious, in terms of getting publishing,
Yep.
what's the best way to get there?
That's interesting. I think that being in one of those 5 towns would be the best way. Now, I did mention there are publishers all sorts. Like Minneapolis, where I'm from, has a bunch of publishers. Boston has some. I have a friend who works at Prentice Hall, or maybe it's Mifflin in Boston. So there's other places. So almost anywhere is there. So then it's a question of like working connections that way, applying. I think that's really going to. It's almost like any new thing you're going into. Try to understand. Read Publishers Weekly. Read industry magazines. Go to a book fair. So Book Expo America is coming from New York, and that's one way you can lean into some of that. Get your resume out there into that world. would be the thing. I don't know. Talk to people in the industry. They're happy to open doors for you. I have my business cards over there. Feel free to take it. I'm happy to help you. Last year I had a long conversation with one of the editors of the student newspaper from last year. She's going to London this year, but she's looking for a job for next year. So we talked about that. I'm happy to help you going forward. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I want more hope nights in the publishing world. It's just me and like 2 other people. So, other questions?
Well, Christmas break coming up. What's one book that you would recommend that you've read in the last year that these students should consider reading?
Can I do my book plug now?
Yeah,
that was a nice little thing. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of books over there. I can't talk about all of them, but I'll talk about 4 that are kind of cool. Well, I mean, one just is cool. First, this is one of the main things I do is I work or at least oversee the trade catalogs. So we've got the new title announcement catalog from winter 2020, and then we've got the IDP academic fall 2019 catalog. So these are like the things that bookstores go to. So these are fun to look at. You can see things in there. If you ever want anything in here, email me. I'll send you something. So that's that. There's some on the table back there. Okay, so the 3 that I think are the best. So you saw, if you haven't read Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile, I highly recommend it. The Enneagram is a personality typing system like Myers-Briggs on steroids and a really good thing. And you can have endless conversations with your family over Christmas break about whether you're a 3 or a 9 or a 7 or whatever. I'm a 7, by the way, which you can tell when someone's so loud and talky all the time. A lovely book. So if you're sitting home over Christmas break with a cup of tea and you want to just sort of experience the quiet Liturgy of the Ordinary, Sacred Practices in Everyday Life by Tish Warren, who's an Anglican priest in Pittsburgh, former IBCF staffer. This won Christianity's Book of the Year in 2018 or 17. But it's just, she's got a chapter in there on the spirituality of making tea. So just a really lovely book in that vein. Kind of a harder book, but one of the things that's really important that we've published, I thought we published on January 14th, is The Me Too Reckoning, Facing the Church's Complicity in Sexual Abuse and Misconduct by Ruth Everhart. We had a previous book with Thomas Nelson called Ruined, about her own experience of sexual trauma. But this one is just very interesting about the complexities of these issues around sexual abuse in the church and a lot of things we have to own up to. So there's that one as well. And but the one that I found the most useful and interesting is kind of helpful for us where we are. It's called Canoe in the Mountains by Todd Bolsonaro, who's a professor at Fuller. Christian Leadership in Uncharted Territory. So Canoe in the Mountains, the metaphor is Lewis and Clark's expedition. They go up Mississippi, they go up the Missouri River. They're like, we're going to make it to Oregon. And they're like, and there's mountains. Shoot, what are we going to do? And so how do you take your canoes over the mountains? And I think that's sort of a perfect metaphor for our times, where we are. Like, we sort of have gotten to the end of our text. What's happening now in terms of the country and the world. Bolsinger gives ideas for leading into that in those ways. So that'd be 4 that you can start with. But any IDP book would be an excellent Christmas gift for anyone on the list. So. Okay. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you all. I'll hang out here if you want to chat with me. I do have a class at 7 that I'm teaching, but we've got some time. So thank you for coming.
Appreciation for you coming out and spending some time with us. So thank you. Let's give another round of applause.
Yeah, come up by the table. I'll give you some free books.
No, I didn't really. I just no. It was toxic.
How are you? Good. How are you? Good. So, okay, we're
Well, it doesn't exist. I mean, it doesn't exist in like a certain strategy. It's always good word for it. Yeah, no, I love this language that it's not and then you sort of see what it's like.
All just as enjoy. And you pray about these things. And I love it.
I'm going to be using it as a
Anyway. I am looking forward to my so I have to